Good evening, everyone. It's my proud privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker for the day. He is an educator, author of international repute, lawyer, and a judge. Most of us have grown up reading his books on lectures of administrative law, law of writs, commentaries on Constitution of India, commentaries on Transfer of Property Act, commentaries on CPC, and so on. Justice C.K. Thakkar. He is a retired judge of Supreme Court of India. He is also served as judge of Gujarat High Court, Chief Justice of Bombay High Court, and Chief Justice of Himachal Pradesh High Court. He was also an acting governor of Maharashtra for a short span of time. He has a very strong proclivity towards academics, which is clearly visible to his contribution. Other than writing books, he has also taught at L.A. Shah Law College till he was elevated to the High Court as a judge. Thank you so much, sir, for taking time from your schedule and accepting our invitation to address the participants on the topic of rule of law and writ jurisdiction of law. I most humbly request you to address the audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I may tell you that so far as all students and junior lawyers are concerned, I am extremely happy to be with them today through this model. As you all know, there are three organs of the state: legislature, executive, and judiciary. The function of legislature is to enact law, function of executive is to administer law, and function of judiciary is to interpret the law. As far as constitution is concerned, the concept of rule of law has been accepted in our constitution, and lawyers and students must be aware that in Keshwanand Bharti case, it's a 13-judge bench who had decided the matter. It was said that rule of law is part and parcel of basic structure of the Constitution of India. It is said that as far as the concept is concerned, it was by Professor Dicey. Professor Dicey, in his book published in 1885, that is in 19th century, he said that rule of law is there in England. As we all know, as far as England is concerned, there is no written constitution like Constitution of India or Constitution of United States of America, or for that purpose any other country. There were only certain, say, bills were there: Bill of Rights, Magna Carta, and other such documents. But he said that the rule of law is there. By rule of law, he said that it contains three principles: equality before law, supremacy of law, and as far as rights are concerned, he said that judge-made law or interpretation by courts via judiciary, by judiciary. So he accepted it, and according to him, there should not be a droit or administrative or as it is said that a system in France, where it was said that the laws are different, courts are also different. For, say, common people, there is one type of laws and one set of courts, while with regard to government servants and other officers, it would be other type of laws and other type of courts. That was not accepted by him. According to him, there is no supremacy of law, there is no equality before law, and rule of law will not prevail. In our constitution, we had accepted the principle. Ours, as you all know, ours is the written constitution. It contains from preamble, and in preamble also it is said that we the people of India. It is not by A or B, it is not by any person, but it is by people of India. So we have dedicated ourselves to Constitution, and Constitution is in that sense our Constitution. There are several parts in the Constitution, parts relating to fundamental rights, parts relating to directive principles of state policy, state and central relations, the independence of judiciary. Independence of judiciary would include, and as it is said, establishment of the Supreme Court, establishment of high courts, as well as subordinate courts. Now, all the three principles we have borne in mind. First is that supremacy of law. As far as India is concerned, law is supreme. In England also, as Dicey said, that though it is said that king can do no wrong or king is above everything, according to him, king is under God and king is under law. So, law would bind all persons, including king. As far as India is concerned, it is very well settled that all are bound by law. In fact, in certain cases, question arose before the Supreme Court whether state is bound by law or not. Because as per Austinian theory, Austin had said, Bentham and Austin, they have said that law is a command from sovereign. It comes from upward and going to downwards. So it is binding to all people and citizens, but not to king, queen, or dictator. We have never accepted the principle so far as our constitution is concerned, and we have said that law would bind all persons, including semi-governments, governments, and even the state. Second principle, equality before law. Equality before law is also accepted by us in our constitution. There is one set of laws and one type of courts only, which are there. All courts are administering justice in accordance with law under the constitution or relevant law for the time being in force. So, equality before law is also established. As regards third principle, of course, judiciary is there, Supreme Court is there, high courts are there, and subordinate courts are there. But one thing I want to point out at this stage is that initially when I was in BA, my subject was political science, politics. So I had studied Harold Laski and other, authors. I felt that why Dicey had said that there is no need of written constitution because it is for courts to administer law and it is for courts to ensure that all persons are independent and judiciary is impartial. But in 1975, I was convinced that Dicey was wholly right. The younger generations might not have seen those days, but must have studied in their law books and these cases. If they are aware, in 1975, a challenge was made to election in an election petition filed against the then Prime Minister of India. High Court of Allahabad set aside the election of the Prime Minister of India at that time, and she was ordered to be unseated. History notes that the judgment was pronounced, I think, probably on 12th of June or somewhere, 12th June 1975. Within short days, there were, say, an attempt was made to file an appeal against the order passed by High Court of Allahabad, and stay was sought to be obtained. It was during vacation because in June the Supreme Court is on vacation. So only one judge, that is known as vacation judge, was available. Vacation judge did not grant full stay. Vacation judge granted partial stay, stating that she would not continue as the Prime Minister of India. The decision was not liked by the Prime Minister, and as we know, probably on 25th June or somewhat on such day, there was declaration of emergency. Many political leaders were also, say, taken behind the bars under preventive detention laws, and emergency was declared. Those persons filed writ petitions in different high courts. And as far as I recollect, about 9 high courts, a preliminary contention was raised on behalf of the government that petitions are not maintainable because fundamental rights are suspended under the declaration of emergency signed by the President of India. All the high courts, all 9 high courts, I say, all the 9 high courts have held that no, petitions are maintainable. You may be able to convince us on merits of the matter, namely that so far as orders of preventive detention are concerned, they are in accordance with law, and therefore they are not entitled to, say, writ of habeas corpus, so that they can be, say, freed from jail. But you cannot say that petitions are not maintainable at all. Law. All those matters were taken to the Supreme Court, and before the Supreme Court it was contended by the Attorney General that when Article 21 was suspended by the President of India by issuing notification, nobody can file a habeas corpus petition, and all the high courts were wrong. Unfortunately for the nation, the contention was upheld. Of course, one judge there was a dissenting judgment, Justice Khanna, and Justice Khanna said that no, the majority was not right, and writ petitions are maintainable. Maybe that, as I had told you, and as the High Courts have also said, that on merits petitions may be dismissed, that is a different thing. But petitions are maintainable, and therefore it is open to them to file petition. According to Justice Khanna, Article 21 is not the sole repository of freedom or right of freedom. It is inherent. It is natural right. It is given by God to all. And at that time, I felt that Dicey was wholly right. That if you are not able to preserve your, say, independence, if courts are not able to protect you or ensure your rights, then written constitution or something written in, say, A book or B book is wholly immaterial. That is why it is said that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. It is not where you find your, say, right is available, or for that purpose Article 32. As you know, Article 32, under Article 32, a person can directly go to the Supreme Court for enforcement of fundamental rights. But if the judiciary itself is unable to give you justice, or judiciary itself feels that no, in the circumstances we are unable to give you, protect you or grant you relief, then obviously Dicey was right that it is the necessity is there. Of course, one thing is certain, that thereafter there is the amendment in the Constitution. First, initially there was 42nd Amendment, thereafter 44th Amendment, and under 44th Amendment now, even during the time of emergency, so far as fundamental right to life and right to liberty is concerned, it cannot be taken away. So to that extent, the position is now very well settled. So that is how the rule of law in England as well as in India prevailed. Now, I was also saying that written constitution is there. Now, under the constitution, there are several parts. For instance, part 3 are fundamental rights. Now, let us see the development of constitution. Initially, it was said that part 3 would operate on part 4, fundamental rights, and part 4 is directive principles of state policy. It is no doubt true that in case of any conflict between part 3 and part 4, part 3 will prevail over part 4. There are certain decisions of the Supreme Court in 50s and 60s when it was said that all right, there is some discrepancy or some conflict between a question raised which would cover directive principles of state policy under part 4 and also under part 3, that is fundamental rights part 3. And the courts have held that no, part 3 will prevail over part 4. By passage of time, it was said that no, as far as possible, we will try to interpret a document, a law, and particularly law of the land, Constitution itself, which is the sacred book as far as Indian people are concerned. As far as possible, therefore, construction or interpretation of all provisions would be in consonance with the intention or what founding fathers or framers of the Constitution intended. As it is said in a literary language, entire Constitution is written by the same pen and ink. Now, if it is written by same pen and ink, then you cannot ignore part 4 while interpreting part 3 or vice versa. So, whenever question arises before a court which may relate to fundamental rights, a topic covered by part 3 of the Constitution, you will have to bear in mind, you will have to keep in view not only part 4 where such question is raised, but part 4 or other parts also. Say for example, powers of Supreme Court and powers of High Courts. Similarly, with regard to legislative, say relations between between the state governments and central government. And by interpreting in such a manner, only you can do justice to the people. So that is how the law has developed, and it is said that several statutes which have been initially in early days, they were held to be either say contravening provisions of part 3 of the Constitution or analogous principles, but thereafter many such statutes were held to be constitutional and intra vires. The question may also arise with regard to relations between state or state on the one hand and central government or other states on the other hand. Now, there also the courts will have to decide. There are certain questions which can only be decided by the Supreme Court. Say, for example, there is some dispute between one state and another state, or between the state and center. Obviously, it is the only court, Supreme Court can decide, because any other court has no jurisdiction. But when such question arises either in the High Court or in the Supreme Court, where other states are concerned, other questions are also there, then the court will decide keeping in mind the provisions of the Constitution. Such questions, many questions, such questions arose also before the Supreme Court. For instance, say for example, sometimes there is declaration of emergency, and it is contended that declaration of emergency is at the instance of ruling party, either at the center, A party or B party, and state would be in the state there would be government of some other party. The question before the court in those cases was whether such a question can be raised and can be agitated before the court, and whether the Supreme Court can decide such question. Supreme Court has in no uncertain terms said that it is true that it is subject to satisfaction of the President of India. But at the same time, Supreme Court has said that if it is based on irrational consideration, it is arbitrary, then in that case, the court has power to interfere and the court may hold that declaration of emergency by the President of India is ultra vires the constitution. Because as far as our constitution is concerned, one thing will have to be borne in mind is that it is in that sense supremacy is of constitution, but one more power is there that even constitutional amendment can also be challenged, as held by I had said also, as held by the Supreme Court in Keshwanand Bharti. Say fundamental features or basic structure cannot be challenged by even by the constitution. Recently, if you are aware, Article 124A with regard to collegium system and appointment of High Court and Supreme Court judges, it was no doubt it was constitutional amendment, but the court has held that no, it was ultra vires the constitution. To some extent, I may say, therefore, to law students who have studied jurisprudence and particularly Kelsen's law of theory, to that extent, Kelsen also stands modified. If you are aware, friends, Kelsen has said that whenever some challenge is made by a citizen or by a petitioner, it can be tested on the touchstone of some provision of law. Say, for example, I may give illustration. Say, for example, a notification is issued that you can go by, say, particular road only in one direction and not in other direction. As it is said, it is one way. Now, the person says that no, I want to go by other way also. Means I do not want to go by that road, but I want to come from that road. Now, whether it can be challenged. So he can say that no, it is my right. He can rely on some provisions of law. If some provisions of law are pointed out, then he can also further rely that all right, something like Article 19, I have a fundamental right. And under that fundamental right, I can not only go from that road in A direction, but in B direction also. Now, at that point of time, it is said that no, there are certain restrictions or certain limitations, or as far as fundamental rights are concerned, and if they fall within those parameters or within those restrictions, then you cannot claim your fundamental right also. Now, as far as Kelsen's pure theory is concerned, you can go up to that. In his words, according to him, it is Grundnorm. Grundnorm means thereafter you cannot go anywhere else. You will have to stop there because it is the peak of the mountain. And at the peak of the mountain, you will have to stand. You will have to say no further. As far as Indian Constitution is concerned, it is very clear that even constitutional amendment can also be challenged. And as I had told you, constitutional amendments have been challenged, and in certain cases, such say challenge has been upheld, and constitutional provisions have been held ultra vires. So this is how our constitution works. I have also said that you want to say anything?
So there is a question from one of the participants.
Yes.
That is Advocate Manoj Pandey. He is asking regarding 42nd Constitutional Amendment
Yes.
and 1976th Amendment. So
Yes.
he asked about whether the Constitution was not secular before, because there was insertion of certain words. So he is asking whether it was not secular before, why there was a need of insertion of new words in it. And second is why the revocation of that term not being granted.
What was not granted?
Revocation of the term was not granted. That is the question that he is asking.
See, so far as 42nd Amendment is concerned, as I had told you, it was during the period of one government which was on power. It was felt that certain provisions, rightly or wrongly, I am not expressing any opinion because it may be said to some extent political questions, but many amendments were made which went not only in respect of A or B party, but certain rights had been taken away. As I had told you, it was considered that Article 21 is sole repository of state. Now, how that can be done? But therefore, it was said that no, certain amendments you cannot make certain amendments. And in spite of the end, mind well, the framers of the constitution were very much aware, and that is why they had also made certain provisions. By 42nd Amendment, certain provisions were made, and it was said that whether those provisions were intra-vires or ultra-vires. Of course, 44, as I had told you, by 44 Amendment, many amendments have been again restored, and those amendments will not take place. But on judicial side also, it was held by the Supreme Court. For instance, Article 323A, that is establishment of certain tribunals, and Central Administrative Tribunal was established, and initially the provision in Sampath Kumar or some case, it was held that it is constitutional, but in L. Chandra Kumar, it was held that the provisions was ultra vires the constitution, and that is how the courts have interfered. So I was saying that with regard to constitution. Now I may tell you one thing more also, and that is with regard to writ petitions. The one hand, the framers of the constitution had granted rights, that is fundamental rights were granted. Other than fundamental rights, constitutional rights have been granted. Say for example, 308, 9, 10, 11, say civil services, then 303, 4, that is trade relations, etc. All those rights have been granted. Now, founding fathers also thought that for the purpose of enforcement of rights, some remedy also must be provided for. Now, as you know, initially there were 7 fundamental rights, and 7th fundamental rights was in the form of Article 32. Article 32 of the Constitution says that for the purpose of enforcement of any right enshrined or guaranteed by this part, that is Part 3, a party may directly go to the Supreme Court. So virtually, to students and lawyers, I want to impress that virtually it is not a right in that sense as given by other rights. Say for example, Article 14, equality is conferred. Article 19, say liberty is conferred. 32 does not confer any right. 32 merely provides in that sense remedy. Ubi jus ibi remedium. So in that sense, you cannot say that any right, specific right is conferred on an individual or a citizen. But framers of the Constitution were aware that no, there is not so much education. People are illiterate. They may not be able to know their rights. And therefore, we will bear this fact in mind. And that is how Article 32 was also enacted and put in Part 3 of the Constitution. This is the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. But mind well, jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, as far as Article 32 is concerned, it is very much limited and limited to enforcement of fundamental rights only. Then the courts were also aware that some jurisdiction must be granted to high courts also, and that is how they have also framed 226 of the Constitution, along with 227 supervisory jurisdiction. As far as Article 226 is concerned, the founding fathers felt that any person aggrieved by any decision, he or she can go, or it, company, etc., can approach the Supreme Court if it relates to fundamental right under Article 32, and for any other purpose. Therefore, for any other rights, enforcement of those rights, a person can go or approach the High Court also. In that sense, jurisdiction of the High Court is wider than the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. And if the High Court is convinced that yes, some illegality has been committed, or that the person deserves relief, in that sense, relief can be granted in his favor. Now, there are 5 types of writs which can be granted under the Constitution of India. As far as personal liberty is concerned, normally it is a writ of habeas corpus which is sought. Habeas corpus, by literary meaning, bring the body before the court, bring the body before us. In good old days, whenever such writ is filed, the person, the prisoner, was brought in court. Prisoner was asked as to what he has to say, as to what the other side, that is government, has to say, and the court will thereafter pass the order. Thereafter, that practice was given up. Only arguments were to be heard through advocate or through next friend of the detainee or prison, and the court will normally, whenever it is said, in England it is said that petition may be of one line, wherein it is stated that I have been illegally detained or I have been illegally imprisoned. If such expression is used by either by the detainee or prisoner, or by his near relative, wife, husband, or friend, then it is for the government, it is for the crown, it is for the king or queen to justify that such detention or imprisonment is in accordance with law. Hence, it is not necessary for the detainee or prisoner to convince the court that I have been illegally detained or illegally imprisoned. It is for the state authorities, it is for the government or crown to convince the court that yes, the detention or imprisonment is in accordance with law. Now, if the court is convinced that detention or imprisonment is legal, petition will be dismissed and rule will be discharged. Rule which has been issued at the time of hearing of the matter will be discharged. And if the court is convinced that no, there is no justification for imprisonment or for detention, in that case, the petition would be allowed and the direction will be given, or writ will be issued in the form of habeas corpus, saying that he must be set at liberty unless he is required for any other purpose, for any other case, etc. I may give you one, say, interesting development so far as the habeas corpus in India is concerned. Normally, the practice of the high courts as well as of the Supreme Court is that as soon as such petition is filed, a rule is issued by the court. It is known as Rule Nisi, R-U-L-E-N-I-S-I, Rule Nisi. Rule Nisi is issued, and the government or the state authorities is called upon to justify the action. So state authorities will file affidavit in reply, affidavit in support of the contention or in support of the action which has been taken. A particular date is fixed, say for example after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and on that day the matter will be heard finally by the court. In good old days, in early days means I am saying after the constitution, in 50s, in 60s, in 70s, the position was that on returnable date, say for example, the petition is filed on 1st of January, 1st or 2nd January, Rule 90 is issued, and it was made returnable on 14th or 15th or 16th January. So on that day, the matter will be taken up for final hearing. The matter will be taken up for a hearing of arguments. It is quite possible that by that time, the detainee or prisoner is, say, set free. The detention is withdrawn and he is ordered to set at liberty. He is no more in prison. Now, initially in those cases, there are several judgments also by various high courts as also by the Supreme Court, that in such cases normally the court used to pass the order that since the detainee or prisoner is already released, the writ has become infructuous. Infructuous meaning thereby that now no purpose is served by issuing any writ of habeas corpus because he is no more in detention. Now what happened at some point of time in 80s and 90s, and even now also sometimes it happens at some places, for say illegal purposes, say with a view to save government or with a view to ensure that there should not be no confidence motion passed against the sitting government, some persons are taken either under NSA, National Security Act, or some such preventive detention laws. It is only for few days because the government wants the ruling party wants his absence for a day or two when that exercise is undertaken either on floor or at some point of time. And as soon as it is over, the order will pass that all right, his detention order is revoked. Now the court came to the conclusion that in such cases that no, this is not proper. In such cases, something must be done. And the Supreme Court, for the first time as far as I recollect, for the first time in the world, for the first time it was decided that no, in such cases, the court will also award compensation to that man and direct the state authorities to pay compensation. I distinctly recollect this. The reason is that when I wrote Law of Writs, that is when I revised Law of Writs, I wanted it to dedicate to Lord Denning. Now, I had never seen Lord Denning, but I wanted to dedicate it to him because I was knowing by communications, by letters. So I requested His Lordship first to grant permission so that I can dedicate the book to him. So a dummy book was prepared by Eastern Book Company of Surendra Malik and his associates. A book was sent to Lord Denning, and Lord Denning had some trouble also, his eye, because of his age, because he was, I think, 95, 96 at that point of time. So he read some part of it, some part he asked his secretary to be read over to him, and he initially finally he had come to this chapter with regard to payment of compensation on habeas corpus, and he had written a letter to me that originally the concept of writ petition, habeas corpus, etc. is English concept, which you have, that is, which has been accepted by Indian courts, including Supreme Court. Now, this is for the first time that Indian Supreme Court, and thereafter High Courts also, Indian Supreme Court and High Court, that is, Indian courts have accepted this principle with regard to payment of compensation in case there is mala fide exercise of power or mala fide detention or imprisonment And I wish that let British court also follow Indian tradition or Indian law declared by the Supreme Court. So as Indian, I was really happy that it is a certificate given by Lord Denning to our Indian courts, Supreme Court as well as High Courts. So that is how, with regard to habeas corpus. There is another writ, mandamus. Mandamus means do this. Say, sometimes powers are given and duties are also conferred on the authorities. Say, state government or boards, universities, schools, panchayats, municipalities, and they are not exercising their powers and discharging their duties properly. In such circumstances, also a party can go, a aggrieved party can go to a high court if it relates to any other right or fundamental right. If it relates to only fundamental right, the party can either go to the High Court or even Supreme Court under Article 32. And if it is not done, in that case, the court will say that it is like, do this. You will have to exercise your duty. You will have to exercise your power. And if it is not done, we will tell you, we will ask you, we will direct you to discharge your duties in accordance with law. Many such cases, say for example, service cases, promotion is not given or payment of salary is not made, in admission is not given by educational institutions, medical, engineering or other such matters, or there is illegal dismissal from service of civil servants, illegal say termination of contract with the state authorities, because otherwise purely contractual it may not be possible. But if it is with the state authorities, then in such cases a party can go to a court of law, and either High Court, Supreme Court, or even a trial court also they can go, and the authorities may pass the order. So in such cases, he or she or it can go to the court and say that no, they must be prevented from proceeding further. Then certiorari. Now certiorari is after the action is taken. It is something like it is said that you will certify that what has been done by the lower authorities or by lower courts is in consonance with law. So action is taken, order is passed, and it is challenged. Now, say for example, admission is not given to a student. If admission is not given, obviously he or she is an aggrieved party. So he or she will file a writ petition either in the High Court or in the Supreme Court, if 32 can be attracted on the facts of the case. But suppose she or he has gone to High Court saying that, sir, admission has not been given to me illegally. The court will consider the matter. The court will ask the other side to justify. For instance, simply I am giving an illustration. Suppose 450 marks was given admission and 460 marks was not given admission. Obviously, it can be said that the person is aggrieved, and the court will pass an appropriate order, will hear the parties, and will say whether the action is in consonance with law or not. In such cases, the courts have also held that principles of natural justice must be complied with. If it is not complied with, in that case also the court will interfere. As far as Indian judiciary is concerned, some principles, new principles also have been formed by Indian Supreme Court as well as High Court. Say for example, in case of punishment, something like the doctrine of proportionality. For instance, as in Ranjit Thakur's case, the question was that a person from army, he had refused to take food which was offered to him. Of course, in army, strict discipline is required. At the same time, however, you cannot say that he is not a human being. So when food was offered to him and he refused to take the food, the action which was taken was that he was ordered to be imprisoned. He was completely dismissed from service, and the question was raised before the court. The matter went to the up to the Supreme Court also, and Supreme Court said that you cannot convict or you cannot punish a person for such a say default on his part by imposing such say huge penalty, and it was set aside. So that the doctrine of proportionality was also now has been accepted. Similarly, with regard to doctrine of uh, promissory or equitable estoppel and other such principles have also been accepted by the courts. This is with regard to certiorari. And finally there is another writ known as the writ of quo warranto. Now, writ of quo warranto is by what authority you are occupying the office. Obviously, it relates to public office. If a person is occupying a particular position in public office, any person who can say that the such occupier has no authority or no right to occupy such office, then such a writ petition can be filed. Mind well, it is not by, in that sense, aggrieved party. It is virtually, in that sense, it is a public interest litigation. It is in the larger interest that such a step is taken. And if the court is convinced that on the facts and circumstances and in accordance with the provisions of law, particular, say for example, municipal law, panchayat law, or law of the land, legislature, etc., and cannot hold the office, in that case, the petition will be allowed and the person will be unseated. If it is held that he or she is occupying the post in consonance with law, obviously, in that case, the petition will be dismissed. That is how these 5 writ petitions are accepted under the Constitution of India. Yes, any question now?
Thank you, sir.
Yes?
Yes, sir. I have few questions. So,
Yes.
there is the question asked by Dr. Shilpi Sharma, who is the HOD of Department. So, she says
No,
that in
yes.
recent times,
Once again, repeat it.
yes, yes, sir. So, this
Huh.
question is asked by our HOD, Dr. Shilpi Sharma. She is asking that there are different writ petitions filed these days relating to the economic policies that are made by the government. And the courts have, however, rejected this. So, what is your stand in it?
No, I have not followed it. What? Once again, please repeat.
No problem, sir. No problem. So, the question is that many times the writ petitions are filed against the economic policies. And the courts, however, have rejected it. So, sir, what is your stand on it?
Now, in fact, there are certain limitations as far as writ jurisdiction are concerned. And at present, we are considering writ jurisdiction of the High Court as well as Supreme Court. There are certain limitations. One of such limitations is that policy decisions taken by the government or some semi-government or some authority. If it is a policy decision taken by the government, if it is a policy resolution passed by some authorities, in that case, unless it adversely affects your right, your fundamental right or some statutory right, the court may not interfere in policy matters. So, the question would be obviously before the court whether it is strictly in accordance with policy. If it is so, the court will not interfere. But if it is not purely policy, then in that case, the court may interfere.
Okay. So, the next question is asked by one of the participants. He wants to have a clarity on difference between the Article 226 of the Constitution, which provides writ jurisdiction, and 482 of CRPC, which talks about the inherent power of the High Court.
Right, right. He is right that yes, both are different. As far as Section 482 of Code of Criminal Procedure is concerned, it is available only in respect of criminal prosecution, because some proceedings must have been initiated against the person who has approached the High Court by invoking Section 482 of the Constitution. If he feels that prosecution is illegally launched against him, or that it should not have been launched against him, FIR should not have been filed against him, then for quashing of criminal proceeding, law provides the remedy, and that remedy lies under Section 482 of Code of Criminal Procedure. And if the High Court is satisfied, the High Court will grant relief and quash proceeding. But mind well, it is not that a High Court has no jurisdiction in such cases also under Article 226 of the Constitution. It is true that 482 provides the remedy, and while exercising power under Article 226 of the Constitution, the High Court will also take into account this fact. The reason is that an alternative remedy is available to the party. And one of the principles of non-exercise of writ jurisdiction is availability of remedy, which is alternative. But at the same time, in some cases, courts have interfered under Article 226 while granting relief in favor of the person by exercising extraordinary jurisdiction under Article 226 of the Constitution. But normally, the question who has put the question is right, that normally in such cases, the party would go under by invoking Section 482 of Criminal Procedure Code rather than 226 of the Constitution. Yes.
So the next question is from a faculty from our school, and she asks, what should be a citizen's duty if the judiciary does not follow the rule of law?
Judiciary has followed rule of law always. Hello?
So maybe she is referring to the case of habeas corpus, which is considered as a black letter judgment. Probably that could be the question.
As far as judiciary...
So the other question is from one of the participants. Yes, sir.
Yes, what I was saying is that judiciary has always followed, and judiciary must follow this rule of law and everything. As far as habeas corpus judgment, that is ADM Jabalpur, if she is referring, obviously the Supreme Court, according to me, Supreme Court was wrong. And as Sirvai has said in his Constitutional Law of India, it was the self-inflicted injury by the judiciary to judiciary itself. So that judgment will have to be, ignored as far as the settled legal position is concerned, in my opinion. Yes, next question.
Right, sir. So another question is relating to a student wants to have a clarity on the jurisdiction under Section 226 and 227.
Yes, this is also a good question.
If in a sentence, if you can.
Yes, this is also a good question. As far as 226 jurisdiction is concerned, 226 and 227, in a simple language, I may say, jurisdiction under Article 226 of the Constitution is concerned, it is original jurisdiction. So whenever a person directly goes to the High Court by invoking Article 226 of the Constitution, he or she is invoking original jurisdiction of the High Court, guaranteed under the Constitution and conferred by Constitution makers on High Courts. As far as Article 227 is concerned, the jurisdiction is supervisory. Jurisdiction is that sense revisional. Some action is taken by some authority and the person concerned is aggrieved by that decision, then he is invoking jurisdiction of the High Court saying that, sir, look at your subordinate court, subordinate authority, subordinate judiciary. It may be tribunal, it may be an administrative officer exercising quasi-judicial function, it may be a lower court, in actual court, district court, sessions court, court of judicial magistrate, but he or she has exercised the power which is not in consonance with the provisions of law, and therefore I am before you. You please exercise your supervisory power, revisional jurisdiction, and grant me the relief. This is the difference.
Thank you, sir. So there is one more question, sir.
Yes.
Which is regarding lack of sentencing guidelines. So the participant wants a clarity on whether, like, when we don't have a absence of structural sentencing guidelines, or where there is a lack of sentencing guidelines, can we say that in that circumstance also it is affecting rule of law?
Sentencing means criminal law? Hello?
Yes, sir. Here the participant have tried to relate two things. Here they have said that there is a lack of sentencing guidelines or absence of structural sentencing guidelines. So will this affect the rule of law?
No, I may say that as far as sentencing is concerned, it depends upon the substantive law which is in force and substantive law under which a person is prosecuted. Say, for example, penal code. Now, if it is penal code, then say all provisions have been made, and it is said that what will be the sentence which can be awarded on the criminal. Only in few cases it was said that minimum sentence is provided and less than minimum cannot be ordered. Otherwise, sentencing approach is there. Court will exercise its discretion and court will pass an appropriate order. With regard to other laws also, that is other substantive criminal laws, Dowry Prohibition Act, Prevention of Corruption Act, and several other laws are there. Say this Prevention of Food Adulteration Act. Their sentencing provisions have been made and they can be followed. Now, as far as policy is concerned, it is said that in Samant they must have, the student as well as other students have also studied. There are several theories: deterrent theory, reformative theory, other theories are also there, retributive theory. The court will take into account the facts and circumstances and will pass an appropriate order imposing appropriate penalty. And there also, Supreme Court as well as all courts have said that courts should not be too liberal in granting, awarding punishment, as well as it should not be too strict also. It is obviously for the court, considering the facts and circumstances, to award appropriate punishment upon the criminal. Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. I think
Thank
that's
you.
all regarding the questions. I don't think that will finish anytime soon, because you have helped us travel through droit administratif from France to jurisprudence to rule of law, various judgments of the High Court and Supreme Court. So obviously there will be so many questions that will be raised in the minds of the participants. And some of them are relating to the criminal law also. So that is the reason I'm not asking those questions.
Sure.
So thank you so much, sir, for taking out time and
if
providing such an enriching lecture.
if they have
Yes, sir.
further questions, again also I will come, no problem. Huh?
It is indeed a pleasure to host you. And I, on behalf of my university, thank you for taking out time, accepting our invitation, and giving such a fruitful lecture to our participants. I also thank J.K. Shah sir and Tina ma'am for all the coordination that they have done. I also thank all the participants across the country, the lawyers from Surat Bar, from Gujarat High Court, all over the country, academicians, the students participating and making this webinar a great success. Thank you so much, sir, again, for accepting our invitation. Thank you.